Hello everyone and welcome to everyone who is listening. This week's shiur in Topics of Kashrut is entitled How to Make Kosher Cheese and the Parmesan Controversy of 2015. The shiur was originally delivered in the Beis Medrash. We learned it together with a group of members from the Young Israel. Unfortunately, due to technical reasons, the recording did not work, so we are re-recording it now so that everyone, if you could not make it that evening, can listen online. But because of that, unfortunately, you will not be able to hear all of the insightful comments and questions from the participants, but you will hear the content of the shiur. So what is this shiur about? It's about cheese, how to make cheese in general, how to make kosher cheese, and in particular, there's an issue just raised this year regarding Parmesan. What was the Parmesan controversy of 2015? Some of you maybe saw articles about in the springtime of this year. It was announced that for the first time, at least in recent history, there would be true, authentic, kosher Parmesan cheese. Now, you might ask, but what do you mean? We all have Parmesan cheese. We go to the store and buy a Parmesan cheese with an OU on it. And the answer is that apparently the Parmesan cheese that we eat in the United States is not quote-unquote real Parmesan cheese. Why? Apparently the official way to make true Parmesan cheese, and apparently the real name for real Parmesan is Parmigiano Reggiano, or something like that. And there are specific rules and traditions of how to make this true Parmesan. And one of the ingredients, or one of the necessary steps for something to be true Parmesan, is that one agent used in the process is actually part of the lining of the stomach of a calf, a young cow. That every cheese requires some enzyme, rennet, to cause the milk to separate, to curd away and become cheese. And one way to get rennet naturally is that it's found in the lining of an animal's stomach. It's one of the enzymes used as part of the digestive system. And therefore they take part of a calf's stomach and put it into the vat of milk to make the cheese. And so you probably would assume that that is not kosher, and therefore there have never been true kosher Parmesan cheese. And the Parmesan that we find in our stores is not quote-unquote true Parmesan cheese. And apparently in Europe, the word Parmesan is trademarked to mean just that, and therefore in Europe you cannot find anything that is called Parmesan that has a hechsher or is declared kosher, because, again, in Europe it is made in the true old-fashioned traditional way, and therefore is not kosher. But in the spring, as reported in many newspaper articles, you can still Google and find it online, 2 individuals announced, 2 Italian Jews, that they are going to make, for the first time ever, authentic kosher Parmesan cheese. And in the original articles on this, it was also stated that the OU would be overseeing it and certifying it. And then later there were, not long after, soon after, there was a press release from the OU saying that was incorrect. And even though there was an Italian hechsher that would be overseeing it and certifying it, but the OU would not. So we're going to be discussing and learn a little bit, what is the issue? Is it possible to have true kosher Parmesan cheese that is made with the use of a calf's stomach? And if so, what exactly is the debate? Why is it somewhat gray that perhaps some kashrut agencies would allow it and others would not? Okay, so let us begin. The first source is a Mishnah from Maseches Chulin, found in the Gemara in Daf Kuf Tes Zayin Amud Aleph. The middle line of the Mishnah says, Hama'amid ba'or shel keva kshera. If one uses or shel keva, the stomach lining of a kshera, of a kosher animal, meaning a kosher species that was also shechted properly, so that the stomach is absolutely kosher. One could cook it and eat it in some way if he would so choose. And they took that stomach lining and used it to be ma'amid. Ma'amid means to take milk and turn it into cheese, to cause the milk to be omeid, to stand, meaning to firm into cheese. So can you now eat that resulting cheese that was created by by a stomach of an animal. Is that not mixing milk and meat? Is not a violation of basar v'chalav? It should be pointed out that there are other ways to make cheese. You can get rennet from other ways. You can get it from the contents of an animal's stomach. For example, if you shechted an animal and there was milk or cheese in the animal's stomach from what the animal had just recently ate, you could take that content and not the actual stomach itself and use it to cause milk to turn to cheese. Or there are other sources of rennet. We'll see the Gemara already knew about that. And there are sources from non-animal sources that could be used. And nowadays we can produce rennet in a petri dish. So there are other ways to make cheese. So what would happen if someone used a stomach lining to make cheese? So the Mishnah says as follows: Im yesh benosein tam harezu asura. If in the resulting cheese you can taste the flavor of the meat, and in halacha, if you can taste the flavor of an ingredient, it is as if that ingredient is present and you're eating and consuming that ingredient. So if a little bit of not kosher falls into a pot of soup, if a sufficient amount of not kosher food fell in so that you could taste it in the soup, it's as if the not kosher food is present and you're eating and therefore forbidden. So similarly here, if let's say you had a relatively small container of milk and you put this animal stomach lining into it, such that in the resulting cheese there's some measure of taste from the animal's stomach, well then it's as if that meat from the animal is present, and it would be as if you were eating a mixture of milk and meat simultaneously, which is forbidden. Therefore, harizu asura. Therefore, the resulting cheese is forbidden. But if, let's say, you are causing this huge vat of milk to turn to cheese, and you throw in just one little small tiny piece of the stomach, but there's enough enzyme to cause the milk to turn into cheese, and in the resulting cheese, you cannot taste any remnant of the flavor of the stomach because it was so small in proportion to the milk. So then, harizim muteris. So then, the cheese will be permitted. You could eat such cheese, even though it was produced using a piece of basar, a piece of meat, specifically from the stomach of the animal. In general, we assume that a proportion of the volume of 60-1 is a cutoff point, that if the meat in this case is in of a proportion of volume to the milk that is placed in smaller than 1/60th, then we would assume that it would not leave any remaining flavor in the cheese, and the cheese would in fact be permitted. Okay. Now before we apply this to the Parmesan of 2015, we have to analyze some of the commentaries on this piece of Gemara and Mishnah. Initially, Tosfos ask a question on this Mishnah. And they ask as follows. As we will comment and learn a little bit later, the Gemara Maseches Avodah Zarah, the Mishnah there records that the Chachamim made a gzer midrabanan, a rabbinic prohibition against all cheeses that were owned and made by non-Jews. If a Jewish person was not involved in the cheese-making process or did not own the cheese, so then the cheese is forbidden. Even though one might say, why? What could be wrong with cheese? It's a completely natural product, especially the way it was being produced back then. Why should cheese be forbidden? And the Gemara gives several reasons, but one reason it gives is because we are concerned that the agent that they're using to cause the milk to turn to cheese is the stomach from a nevela. A nevela is an animal that died or was not shechted properly, which is not kosher. And thus the stomach is not permitted to be eaten. And they were using this non-kosher item, the stomach of a nevela, to cause the milk to turn to cheese, which would make the cheese forbidden. So Tosfos asks as follows. Tema, we have a question here. The Gemara in Maseches Avodah Zarah explains that the reason why the rabbi said that non-Jewish cheese is forbidden is because because they use the stomach from a nevela, a non-shechted animal, and that is what makes the cheese problematic. So it says, Ma'ir nevela. Why did the Gemara need to resort to say that they use a nevela stomach? Afiluk sheranami, even if they would use a kshera stomach, a stomach from a shechted animal, if that stomach will leave flavor, it would be problematic and the cheese would be forbidden. Tos seems to be assuming that the nevela stomach is also only problematic if it leaves a flavor. So Tos says, either way, whether it's a nevela or not a nevela, a stomach which leaves flavor in the cheese is problematic, and that should be sufficient reason for the rabbis to say that not Jewish cheese is forbidden. Why does the Gemara seem to say it's only because they use an even more severely forbidden item, i.e. the stomach of a nevela? That only for that reason did they make this gzer derabanan, this rabbinic prohibition. Tos answers as follows: V'yesh lomar demishum basar b'chalav lo hayu asurim misafek mishum deleka eli sur derabanan derech bishul asur Torah. Tos answers as follows. He says, you're right. If you know that they used a nevela stomach, a stomach from an animal not shechted, or you know they used a kosher stomach, there's no difference. They're equally forbidden. However, they didn't know that every not-Jewish company used these items to make their cheese. There was a concern. There was a doubt. There was a worry. So Tosfos explains as follows. If the worry was only that they used the stomach of a properly shechted animal, they would have never made this rabbinic prohibition. Why? Because at worst, even if they used the stomach of a shechted animal and flavor remained of the meat, there would be no Torah violation. Basar b'chalav, as we learned in the previous week, basar b'chalav is only forbidden from the Torah if meat and milk are cooked together with heat. But when you have a cold mixture of meat and milk, if you want to eat a sandwich of salami and cheese, that is only forbidden midrabanan, rabbinically. So too here, let's say you have cheese that was produced using the stomach of a shechted animal, and you can still taste the flavor of that stomach, the flavor of that meat. And therefore it is considered as if the meat is present, but still that meat and milk was not cooked together through heat. That's like a cold mixture, a cold combination of meat and milk, which is only a rabbinic prohibition. The derech bishul asur Torah, that only forbade meat and milk on a Torah level if it's cooked through bishul. Therefore, since the worst violation possible would be a rabbinic one, they would have never made a rabbinic gzeira just to protect us from a possible rabbinic violation. However, when they use a nevela stomach, a stomach from an animal that is not shechted, if there will be remaining flavor from a not shechted stomach, so then that would be a Torah violation, because if an animal that is not shechted is forbidden from the Torah, and its flavor is forbidden from the Torah. Therefore, the Gemara in Avodah Zarah was saying it's only due to the fact that there's a concern for a Torah violation, i.e., the fact that they used a stomach from a not shechted animal. For that reason, did the Rabbanan make a blanket gzeira, an absolute prohibition, not to eat any cheese produced by non-Jews. And this is Tosfos' answer of how he differentiates between the keva, the stomach of a nevela, of a not shechted animal, and the stomach of a kosher animal that has been shechted properly. However, there is another approach to Tosfos' question. The Rishonim quote this from the Rimigash, Yosef ibn Migash. Rimigash lived from around 1070 to 1140, and he is not as well known outside of the Beis Medrash. We don't have as much of his writings as we do of other Rishonim, but he's an incredibly important person. The Rambam writes of the Rimigash that he was such a genius that his brain was mavhil, it was frightening. The Rambam says that about the Rimigash. The Rambam looked up to the Rimigash as a quasi-Rebbe of his. The Rimigash was the student of the Rif, Rav Yitzchak Alfasi, and the Rimigash was directly the Rebbe, the teacher of the Rambam's father, Rav Maimon, Moshe ben Maimon. The Rambam was a student of his father, and therefore he viewed the Rimigash, his father's Rebbe, as to some degree his Rebbe. And it is through the Rimigash that the Rambam is connected back to the Rif, and that is one chain, one tradition in understanding and the Gemara and development of halacha. This is a very important person. The Rishonim quote from the Rimigash the following distinction. The Rimigash says that there's a difference between an ingredient in a food or dish that merely adds flavor and an agent which causes some kind of chemical reaction or causes some other attribute to the resulting food other than just flavor. When it comes to flavor, the important cutoff point is, did the ingredient add flavor or not? If only a drop of milk falls in your chicken soup so that you cannot taste the milk, it's still kosher. But if enough milk falls into your chicken soup so that you can taste the milk, well then, it's as if the milk is present. It's a mixture of meat and milk and would be forbidden. However, there are some items that we add not to add flavor. Davar hama'amid is the halachic term. For example, in the days of the Mishnah and Gemara, they did not make dough rise through yeast packets like we buy in the store, but rather there was something called starter dough or sourdough. It was dough, water, and flour that had been left to rise and ferment for so long that it had become basically inedible. And you would take that starter dough and place it on some other large amount of dough to cause the large amount of dough to rise. So, for example, the Mishnah says as follows. Let's say you have a starter dough that was made from truma flour, grain that had been set aside to give to the Kohen, been made into flour, into dough, into this starter dough. Therefore, it has the status of truma, non-Kohen may not eat it. Then let's say you take that starter dough and place it on other dough and cause it to rise and turn into bread after it's been cooked. So the Mishnah says that since that starter dough caused that dough to rise, caused that chemical reaction, even though the starter dough was removed and there's no flavor from the starter dough, but since the starter dough was ma'amid, the entire dough has the status of truma. Since it was caused and formed and created by truma, it retains the status as truma, and therefore a non-Kohen would not be able to eat it. Similarly, the Rimagash says that an agent used to cause milk to turn into cheese, even though that agent may not leave a flavor in the cheese, since it was ma'amid the cheese, it created the cheese will have the status of that agent. Therefore, if you use the stomach of an avela, an animal that was not shechted, so that stomach is not kosher, or use the stomach from a not kosher animal, stomach from a pig or a camel, whatever it may be, even the small amount, they put that in a humongous vat. Since that causes the vat to turn into cheese, the entire cheese is forbidden and has the status of the nevela or the not kosher animal or the treifa, an animal with a severe wound, that is forbidden to eat. However, the Rimagash says this is only true if the mamid, the stomach, was actually forbidden. It was a davar ha'asr. So then the resulting cheese is also asr. But when it comes to using a keva kshera, the stomach from a kosher animal that has been shechted properly, that stomach is completely permitted. It's just that it has the status of being fleishik. For that, we are more lenient. Therefore, we're not dealing with the status of prohibited, but merely the status of being fleishik, of being meat. That we don't apply the stringency that even the tiniest amount, since it is mamid, since it causes the cheese to become cheese, that it should retain that status of being fleishik. Rather, that will follow the regular rules of did it leave actual flavor. So the Rimagash, to remind ourselves, answers to this question as follows. There's a difference between using the stomach of an avela, a not shechted animal or a not kosher animal, and the stomach of a kosher animal properly shechted. If the stomach is properly shechted from a kosher animal, the cheese will be permitted unless there is actually flavor from that stomach, that there wasn't 60 times the milk to the volume of the stomach. However, when it comes to using the stomach of an avela, even the tiniest amount will cause the resulting cheese to be forbidden. Because since that cheese was created through a davar ha'asr, something forbidden, the entire cheese is forbidden. That's why the Gemara says that they said non-Jewish cheese is forbidden because they used the stomach of an avela. If the concern was the stomach of a kosher animal properly shechted, they wouldn't have made the gzeira, the rabbinic prohibition, because probably they make cheese with large amounts, and probably there is 60 to 1 ratio of milk to stomach, and probably there won't be flavor from the stomach. But since they use an avela, or at least sometimes use an avela, and even the smallest amount of an nevela will cause the entire vat of milk and cheese to be forbidden. That is why they made the gzera, because they used the stomach of a nevela. And therefore it is not surprising that the Rambam in his codification of these laws clearly follows the interpretation of the Rimagash, again his father's Rabbi. And the Rambam writes as follows in the third parak of Machalos Asuras. B'mei Chachmei Mishnah, in the days of the Mishnah, Gazru al Gvinas Ha'akum, they made a gzera against the cheese of non-Jews, Va'asrim, and made them forbidden. Why? Mipnei shema'amidin osan ba'or keva shel shchita san shinavela, because they use often the stomach of an animal not shechted properly. V'im tomar, and if you were going to ask, the Rambam writes, Valo or hakeva davar katan huad ma'od, they only use a very small amount of the stomach. B'chalav sha'amad well, compared to the milk that it is turning to cheese. V'lam levatel b'miyut, and therefore it should be nullified, considered insignificant since it is so small. No, mipnei shu ha'mamid ha'gvina, since it is what causes the milk to turn into cheese, it forms it, it creates it. V'hol v'davar ha'asarhu, and therefore since it is a forbidden item, it is from the stomach of an avela or a not kosher animal or a treifa, shehu hamid harei ha'kol asar, everything remains forbidden, the entire cheese, k'moshe bar, as I've explained in other places. And this is in fact how the Shulchan Aruch as well paskins in Siman Pei Zayin. We'll read the Shulchan Aruch. It's basically just a reformulation of the Rambam. The Shulchan Aruch writes as follows: Im hamid gavina b'or kevas ksheira. If one uses the stomach from a kosher, properly shechted animal, yesh ba tam basar, if in the cheese there remains a flavor of the meat, asura, it is forbidden. V'im lav, but if there will be no flavor, for example, there was 60 times the milk to the stomach, muteris, the resulting cheese is permitted. Aval hamamid b'or kevas nevela, but if you use the stomach from a nevela, an animal not shechted properly, utrei, for an animal forbidden because it has a major wound or disease, ubehemet tmea, or use the stomach from a not kosher animal, oser b'kol shehu, even the smallest amount will cause all of the cheese to be forbidden. Hagad, the Rama adds and explains, mishum dedavar ha'aser ba'asma, since it is something intrinsically forbidden, umamid, and it created the cheese, afilu ba'elef lo batal, even in a ratio of 1 to 1,000, it is never nullified. Okay, so what does this mean for our Parmesan? Well, this is why, until now, there never been kosher Parmesan cheese, because the people who produce cheeses, the people who use rennet from animal stomach, from the lining of an animal, they don't use stomachs from animals that have been shechted properly. They get their stomachs wherever they get them from. And therefore, any cheese that is made through animal rennet is forbidden, even without any additional rabbinic decree. So what did these two Italians say? They said, okay, there's a desire for kosher Parmesan. We will make sure to get stomachs from kosher animals, calves, that have been shechted properly, and we will make sure that only a small amount of the stomach is put into very large vats, so therefore it will be less than a ratio of 1 to 60. And therefore, the Shulchan Aruch says, muteris, it should be permitted. It should be permitted. So what is wrong with that? What could be wrong with that? Why would others not accept this? So the reason presumably is as follows. If we use kosher stomachs, we still have to be concerned for the flavor of the meat. And as we said, though, however, if it's a very small piece of the stomach, so it's a ratio of 60 to 1, there's no problem because the resulting flavor is so little it is nullified. It is batel. However, the principle of bittul is only one of b'diavad, after the fact. It's not l'chadchila. You cannot purposefully pour a little bit of milk into your chicken soup, even if you make sure it'll be less than 1/60th. The Chum made a rule and formulated the rule that if by mistake something not kosher falls into something kosher, or something meat falls into something milk, or something milk falls into something pareve, if after the fact the ratio is less than 1/60th, so then it's batel and you don't have to consider its presence. But you may not lechatchila rely and cause the use of this halachic rule of bittul, of nullification. And therefore here, one may not lechatchila place the animal stomach in the milk, even if the animal stomach is less than 1/60th of the volume of the milk, because that is using the principle of bittul. You may not use the principle of bittul lechatchila. That is forbidden. So So how could you do it? So if you continue in the Shulchan Aruch, here on the page, the Shulchan Aruch, in a slightly different context, writes as follows. He records, L'famim, sometimes, molchanoso umiyavshenoso, they would salt and dry out the animal's stomach. Venasa ke'etz, and it becomes almost like wood. Umemalanoso chalav, and this particular case, they would then fill the stomach that has been hardened with milk to turn it into cheese. You could similarly throw this stomach into the vat of milk. Mutter, it is permitted. Since the stomach has dried out, it's just like wood, it doesn't exude flavor. It doesn't have the flavor, the moisture of the meat. So therefore, if one would completely dry out the stomach, and there are certain rules of what is considered sufficiently dried out, which I'm not an expert in, don't have much experience in drying out animal stomachs, or many people ask me shilas about that. But in principle, if you would dry out the stomach sufficiently, as halacha deems it, then one could use that to turn the milk into cheese, to use the rennet from a dried out stomach, because since there's basically no flavor left in the stomach, it would not be a problem of ein mevatel isser lechatchila, of initially relying on the principle of bittul. So, what exactly is the dispute or the difference of opinions between the Italian hashgachas and the OU of why some would approve this new kosher, authentic Parmesan cheese? Perhaps it revolves around this point, but honestly, they did not tell me directly what exactly dispute is, but perhaps it's around this point, whether or not the animal stomachs have been dried out sufficiently, or there's sufficient oversight to make sure, so that there's no violation of ein mevatel and isser lechatchila, that not to use the principle of bittul by using even a small part of a kosher, properly shechted animal stomach to turn into cheese. Does this cheese exist yet? So in the spring newspaper and online articles, they said that the cheeses would be ready the end of 2015, which is when we are. I'm not sure if I've seen them on store shelves, but if you have, please let me know. I'd be very interested to see, again, how exactly it is labeled and listed, and the hechsher that is on it. Okay, this concludes the first part of the shir, the larger part of the shir. And now we turn to the second part of the shir. We had mentioned that there was a gzera, a rabbinic prohibition against all cheeses produced by non-Jews. And Tosfos had quoted, the Rambam also wrote, that the reason for this was because they sometimes use the lining of stomachs from animals that have not been shechted. It should be pointed out that apparently in Europe this is still very common, and maybe even a majority of the cheeses are made through animal rennet from animal stomachs. It is true that the majority, maybe even 80 or 90% of cheeses produced in America do not use animal rennet. They use microbial rennet, made from either fungus or from in a petri dish in a lab. But there definitely still are cheeses in America made from animal rennets. And if you go into Trader Joe's or some other store, you presumably could find a cheese that was made from animal rennet. And certainly all such cheeses are available online to be delivered to your home. Not that we would eat it in our kitchens, but that is important to know for the issue that we were about to discuss. So this is what we're going to discuss now, is that gzeira. The gzeira, d'Rabbanan, not to eat any cheese, even if you don't think it's made from animal rennet, but not to buy cheese made and owned by non-Jews. Okay. So again, if you have the sheet in front of you on page 2, the Gemara in Maseches Avodah Zarah says as follows: My gzerta. What was the gzera? Meaning, why did they say it was forbidden to eat cheeses owned and made by non-Jews? Amr Shim ben Pazi, Amr Shu ben Levi, he said, Mishum Nikur. Because we are concerned that in the process of making the cheese, there are liquids out, there's water, there's other liquids that are involved in the cheese-making process, and we are concerned, a health concern, that a snake came along and bit and injected its venom into such liquids. And the Gemara says there was a gzeira, not to drink any liquids that were left uncovered, open in an area where a snake could get to, again, ostensibly for a health concern. That's the way the Gemara presents it, that there could be snake venom in it. Tosfos says that we no longer observe that law because Tosfos says in our places, in Tosfos' day, there are no snakes around, and therefore such a gzeira does not apply if it is totally unapplicable to the entire area, not just in your specific instance. Okay, but the Gemara says there was such a gzeira, such a prohibition, and therefore that is the entire reason of why non-Jewish cheeses are forbidden, because also we're worried that there might be snake venom mixed in. Again, presumably a health concern, not a halachic concern. Okay, we'll skip a couple lines. The Gemara is not totally satisfied with that explanation. The second to last line, Aru Chanina, no, a different reason. Again, there was this old gzeira. The reason, as the Gemara explains, was not initially revealed of why they made the gzeira, and later the Amoraim are making suggestions of what the reason is, but no one is absolutely certain. So another suggestion is Lefi she'i avshala below tzich suchei chalav, because in every cheese there is some milk, and we're worried that milk comes from a not kosher animal. It's camel milk, it's pig milk, so forth. Amazingly, the Gemara says, and this is correct, that only milk from kosher animals, from a cow, from a goat, can turn into cheese. Milk from a not kosher animal, camel milk, pig milk, cannot be turned into cheese. So the cheese itself, we know, is produced from kosher milk, can't be from not kosher milk, because not kosher milk can't become cheese. But there's some milk in the cracks and crevices of the cheese, and perhaps it's because the non-Jews mixed in some milk from a not kosher animal. Okay, that's another reason why the rabbis were concerned and said that cheese made and owned by non-Jews is forbidden. Shmuel says, the reason that we've been assuming until now, as Tosfos and the Rambam wrote, no, it's because they use the stomach of a nevela, non-shechted animal, to make the cheese, and therefore the cheese is forbidden. Again, we don't know for sure that they do it this way, but there was a concern for it, and for that reason they made a gzer d'Rabbanan. Rav Malkiah Mishmein Rav Ada bar Ava Amar, a fourth possibility. That they would smooth over it and cover the cheese with a layer of pig fat. And apparently, this is also still done with some fancy cheeses, that they are encased in a layer of lard. Amazing. And that's what they did in the days of the Gemara Mishnah as well. And therefore, we're worried that you won't realize that, you won't completely wash it off, whatever it may be, and you're going to eat pig fat. Rav Chisda Amar, Mifnei Shemamid and Osa Bechomer. So Rav Chisda says that no, that they would use as the agent to make the milk turn into cheese, chometz, vinegar, meaning that was produced from not kosher wine. And again, it would be a problem of using a not kosher agent to turn the milk into cheese. Okay, so a whole handful of reasons, suggestions of why they made this gzeira to say that not kosher cheese is forbidden. I believe the Gemara even gives one or two other additional reasons. Again, the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, as we will see, assumes that the primary reason is Shmuel's reason, that they use the stomach of a non-shechted animal. Okay. However, different Rishonim understood differently, and even though the overwhelming majority opinion amongst the Rishonim was that this gzeira is in full force, there were always minority opinions, that said that perhaps there are reasons that this gzeira does not apply. But before we go there, let's turn back to the first page. Let's look at the second paragraph in the Rambam, which we did not read when we initially read this Rambam. The Rambam writes as follows. So again, previously the Rambam wrote that the reason why not Jewish cheese is forbidden is because they often use the stomachs from a non-shechted animal. However, the Rambam writes as follows. cheeses that the non-Jews produced using some agent from grass or some kind of plant, obame peros, or somehow from the juices, or some product of fruit, konsrafa te'enim, from dates, figs, v'harehe nikar b'gvina, and there are pieces of, let's say, the te'enim or the asavim in the cheese, so it's clear that this cheese was not made from animal rennet. You can see the non-animal rennet remnants still in the cheese. So you know that the rabbi's concern of the not kosher animal stomach is not applicable in this case. Haru mixas hagaonim shiasu, or nevertheless the Gaonim ruled that it is forbidden. Shikvar gazru al kol gvina sa'akum, because there was a rabbinic decree against all cheeses produced and owned by non-Jews. Bein shamiduha bedavar ha'aser, whether they used a not kosher agent to make the cheese, bein shamiduha bedavar ha'mutter, whether it was a permissible agent. Gzeira mishum shemaminosa bedavar ha'aser, but they made a gzeira lest you will come to a time when they did use a forbidden agent and the cheese would be forbidden, you would eat it. That's the whole point. It's a gzeira, that it's a blanket rule that if we allow you to sometimes eat cheeses made by non-Jews, eventually you will come to violate perhaps the Torah by eating, or another prohibition by eating cheese that was not produced properly. So even if in this particular case, it was produced in a kosher way, that's the whole reason why there's a gzeira. It's a rabbinic decree. Don't eat it even when there's no problem, lest you eat it when there is a problem. However, again, as we noted, there were always minority opinions amongst the Rishonim who said, no, maybe perhaps this whole decree no longer applies. And really, maybe nowadays we can eat cheese produced and owned by non-Jews as long as we're convinced that it was done in a way that there's no non-kosher ingredient or agent. And so Tosfos, again back on the second page, if you have the sheet, writes as follows in the Gemara. V'omer Rabbeinu Tam says, Ki achshav lo matzinu tam pasha le'isser begvinas oved kochavim. Nowadays, Rabbeinu Tam is saying, in France, in the 12th century, it is not clear why not Jewish cheese should be forbidden. Why? Rabbeinu Tam assumes, unlike the Rambam, that the primary reason, the most correct reason listed in the Gemara, is the concern for the snake venom, the health concern. Not because they use animal stomachs. Why he assumes that we don't have time to go into, but he assumes that is the answer or the suggestion in the Gemara that is accepted in terms of practical halacha. And therefore, since Tosfos was of the opinion, and this is the practice in our communities, that we aren't concerned for snake venom for the health concern nowadays because it's not a concern where we live in our days. So therefore, the whole reason no longer applies, and the gzeira of forbidding non-Jewish cheese should also not apply. Now, should be pointed out that Tosfos, as he quotes Rabbeinu Tam, does not exactly say that not Jewish cheese is permitted today. Does not exactly say that. He says, Lo matzinu tam pasha lisser. He says it is not clear that it should be forbidden. Or it is not clear what is the reason that it should be forbidden. And in fact, there were Rishonim who understood that Rabbeinu Tam was not saying cheese is permitted. He was just saying that it's not clear what the reason why it should be forbidden, or even if the reason does not apply, but the prohibition still does apply, because as a general rule, even when the reasons of gzeras no longer apply, we still observe them, and they are still in full force, even if there are rare exceptions to that rule. But some did understand that Rabbeinu Tam was saying that since nowadays we're not concerned for snake venom, it should be permitted to eat cheese produced by non-Jews. Tosfos further quotes, V'gam gaoni narvona hitiru osam bimkomam mitam shemamidin osam beprachim. The Gaonim, the outstanding scholars of Narbonne in France, allowed people to eat cheese made by non-Jews, mitam shemamidin osam beprachim, because in Narbonne it was known that no one used animal rennet, everyone only used non-animal rennet from vegetables or plants. And therefore there's no concern that they used a not kosher stomach. Just to be clear, see, the Gaonim Narbonne are arguing with Rabbeinu Tam. They understood, like the Rambam, that the main reason for the rabbinic prohibition of non-Jewish cheese is of the concern of using a animal stomach, not because of the snake venom. It's because of the animal stomachs, not kosher animal stomachs. So since in their place they know that no one uses animal stomachs, everyone only makes cheese from non-animal rennet, it is permitted. This is in distinction to the Rambam's case. Rambam was talking about where he said that even non-animal rennet cheese is forbidden, was in a case not that the entire area only used non-animal rennet. There were some people who also use animal rennet, but this specific block of cheese, is non-animal rennet. So there the Rambam said, we can't make distinctions from block of cheese to block of cheese. There has to be a general rule. This is a system of laws. So even if this specific piece of cheese, is not made from animal rennet, it's still forbidden. However, the Gaoni and Arvona say that, however, if in the entire area no cheese uses animal rennet, then it should be permitted. And even this was always the minority opinion and not really accepted, because even if in your city they don't use animal rennet, but in the city next over they use animal rennet, or even if right now your city does not use animal rennet, maybe soon they will use animal rennet, so the decree, the gzeira, has to be applied across the board, even if the particular concern perhaps no longer applies in your location. Nevertheless, there were these minority opinions that said that the gzeira does not apply nowadays. How do we paskin? The Shulchan Aruch writes as follows, the final source. Gevinus ha'ovdei kochavim, Rav Yosef Kaira writes, cheese made and owned by non-Jews, asrum mipnei shema'amirin osan b'or kevas shchitasan shinavela. The Chachamim said that they are forbidden, there's gzeira midrabanan not to eat cheese made and owned by non-Jews, because they sometimes, often, possibly use the stomachs of a non-shechted animal as the agent, and therefore the cheese is totally forbidden. Again, quoting basically the Rambam. Va'afilu hamidu basavim, and even if they used a non-animal based rennet, asura, it is forbidden. We don't accept these minority opinions. It's gzeira d'Rabbanan. The general rule is gzeira apply across the board always, even if the reason does not apply in this particular case. That's the whole reason. The gzeira is, if we let you in one case, then you might come to eat it in a case where it truly is problematic. And that's it. The Shulchan Aruch of Yosef Kaira makes no exceptions, and therefore it would seem that according to Sfardim, there's nothing to discuss, that the gzeira is in full force. It is forbidden to eat cheeses that do not have a hechsher. It is forbidden to eat cheeses that were owned and made by non-Jews without a Jew being involved. And he does not quote at all the minority opinions that are lenient. However, the Ramah writes as follows: Haga v'cheina minag. The Ramah, the source of Ashkenazi halacha, says, and that is our practice. As the Rabbi Yosef Kaira writes, it is forbidden to eat cheese owned and made by non-Jews. Ve'ein lifrotz geder. And a person should not literally break the fence. A person should not challenge, break the community standards. That's what the Ramah is saying. Meaning, the Ramah is saying that I know and you know that there are these minority opinions, the lenient opinions, which were never the majority, which were never accepted. You should not rely on them. If the community standard, which it is, which is the minhag, as the Ramah writes, not to eat cheese owned and made by non-Jews, so then ein lifrotz geder. Do not break that line. However, he does add, im lo b'malkam shenalgo b'hem heter mikan monim, unless you are in a place where there is a tradition based on Rabbeinu Tam or the Gaoni and Arvona to eat such cheese. This is like every machlokas. All things being equal, we follow the majority opinion. Unless your Rabbi, your teacher, you have a specific tradition that you follow the minority opinion. Same exact thing here. The classical poskim on the Shulchan Aruch seem to assume that such a Masorah, that there's a place, a community that follows the standard of the Gaoni and Arvona Rabbeinu Tam simply does not exist anymore. Like many minority opinions, eventually dies with history, and they don't even quote that part of the Ramah when they again recodify the halacha in their works. Now, it should be pointed pointed out, it's not 100% clear who the Rama is saying that some had a tradition to rely on. Does he mean Rabbeinu Tam, that some people rely on Rabbeinu Tam, or does he mean that some people used to rely on the Gaoni and Arvona? Now, again, it's pointed out, presumably the opinion of the Gaoni and Arvona is not relevant to us, even as a leniency, because again, the Gaoni and Arvona were lenient because in their place they only use non-animal rennet, and you cannot find animal rennet-based cheeses. So the concern doesn't apply, but that's not true. In Boston in 2015, you can find an animal-based rennet. The only opinion that would be applicable is Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam, who said that the reason is for the whole gzera is based on a health concern of snake venom, and that is not a concern in Boston 2015, and therefore, according to Rabbeinu Tam, or one reading of Rabbeinu Tam, it would be permitted. But again, the community standard, the minhag of the community, is to follow the majority opinion, which means to require a Jewish person, a hashgacha agency, to be involved in the making of the cheese. Now, it is well known, and it is an undisputed fact, that there were times in the early days in Boston that Rav Soloveitchik told people, individuals, that they could rely, he didn't explain the reasoning to them, but told them that they could eat cheeses that did not have a reliable hashgacha. I've looked into, again, it's an undisputed fact, everyone agrees to that. I've looked into this, and if someone has more information than this, please share with me. But from my investigation, it would seem two important points. One is, it seems clear that even though the Rav allowed that at a certain point, at some point, he no longer allowed it. Why should there be a difference? To ask the historians, I assume in the early decades, there just weren't these Jewish brands that we have nowadays. It was much harder to get cheeses that had a hechsher on it or that were owned by Jews, if it was possible at all. So in such a situation, it's a shas adchak. It's a difficult situation. It's hard to tell people that they're not allowed to eat any cheese. So if nothing else is available, so then you can rely on the minority opinion, as is always the case. In a shas adchak, again, a person has to ask a shaila to a competent Rav and posek who understands the reality and how pressing the situation is and understands the different opinions in the halacha and how much weight should be given to each opinion. But b'shas adchak, you're allowed to rely on a minority opinion that otherwise you would not rely on. Similarly, if let's say someone approached me and they had to attend some family affair and not everyone was religious and they made sure that the food is kosher, but the only problem is that the cheese would not have a hechsher on it, meaning it would be in violation of this gzeira. So if everything else would be kosher, and to not eat the cheese somehow would cause some major rift in the family, it's a shas adchak. So then, of course, someone can speak to a posek about that, and there's certainly room to be lenient and to rely on the minority opinion when it's a shas adchak. So perhaps in the early decades, the Rav felt it was a shas adchak, and at a certain point, it no longer was a shas adchak, and he said that you can no longer rely on these minority opinions. Moreover, it's also unclear what the Rav actually felt when he said it was permissible. He obviously was relying on the minority opinion that the Rama quotes, but was he relying more on Rabbeinu Tam, or was he relying on the Gaoni Narvona? Maybe the Rav felt, and maybe it was true, that at that time there was no animal-based rennet in Boston, which is not true anymore. So perhaps the Rav was only relying on the combination that there's Rabbeinu Tam and the Gaoni Narvona. But even b'shas adchak, he wouldn't rely on Rabbeinu Tam alone, since the leniency of the Gaoni Narvona no longer applies. We don't know. It's unclear. But again, it is clear that he, at some point, he certainly stopped and no longer told people that they could eat Kraft cheese. I believe it was. That was the example, that people would eat Kraft cheese. Again, obviously, even though it did not have a hechsher. And again, if anyone has any more direct first-hand knowledge, I would be incredibly interested and will love to hear from you about that. But now that we have a whole assortment and array of cheeses with proper hashgacha, and is certainly no longer a shas adchak, so then, as the Rama says, that, again, before the Rama, for Sfardim, I'm not sure. The Rabbi Yosef Karo doesn't quote any exceptions of leniency, and even the Rama says v'cheina minig, the minig of Ashkenazim is to assume that it is forbidden to eat any cheese owned and made by non-Jews. Ve'ein lifrot skeder, and we should not break that standard. And that is the second issue in terms of kosher cheese. Why is it that cheeses, even if they are not made from animal rennet, why they require a proper hashgacha so that they are in accordance with the gzera of eating only cheese owned or produced by Jewish people? And that is a little bit some of the issues revolve around how to make kosher cheese and an explanation of the Parmesan controversy of 2015. And we will continue next week with another interesting topic in the fascinating world of Hilchos Kashrus.